They invited me to their mansion thinking I was still broken, still desperate. The Whitmore family wanted to watch me beg, but when I walked through those golden doors carrying my secret, their laughter died, because the twins in my arms shared the same piercing blue eyes as their billionaire son. If you believe karma always finds a way, smash that like button and subscribe for more shocking stories of justice served cold. The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper, so thick it felt like velvet between my fingers. Gold-embossed lettering spelled out, "The Whitmore Foundation Annual Charity Gala," in elegant script that once made my heart flutter. Now it just made my stomach turn. 3 years had passed since I'd seen that cursive W. 3 years since I'd been anything more than a painful memory they'd rather forget. I should have thrown it away. Any sane person would have. But when you've been through what I've been through, when you've had your entire world ripped away by people who smiled while they destroyed you, sometimes you need to see just how far they're willing to go. Because this wasn't kindness. The Whitmores didn't do anything out of kindness, especially not for me. I still remember the day Christopher's mother, Eleanor, sat across from me in that sterile conference room, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent light as she slid those divorce papers across the mahogany table. "You'll sign these, dear," she'd said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "because you know you never really belonged in our world anyway." Her daughter, Victoria, had stood behind her like a loyal soldier, arms crossed, that same cruel smile I'd grown to despise painted across her lips. They'd made sure I walked away with nothing. Every joint account frozen, every shared asset claimed, every connection severed. Christopher just sat there, his blue eyes fixed on the table, choosing his family's money over the woman he'd promised to love forever. "It's better this way, Valentina," he'd whispered, as I signed my name for the last time. "You'll be happier without all this complexity." Complexity, that's what they called their racism. Complexity. But as I held that invitation, something stirred in my chest that wasn't anger or bitterness. It was something calmer, something deeper. You see, the Whitmores thought they knew my story. They thought they'd written the ending when they cast me out of their pristine world. What they didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that I'd been carrying the most precious secret of all when I signed those papers. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet, pushing past the simple dresses I could afford now, until I found it, the black dress I'd been saving. Not expensive, not designer, but elegant in its simplicity. As I held it up to the mirror, I caught sight of the framed photo on my dresser. 2 pairs of the most beautiful blue eyes I'd ever seen. Eyes that looked exactly like their father's, staring back at me with innocent smiles. The Whitmores wanted to invite me back into their world. They wanted one more chance to humiliate me, to prove to their society friends that I was nothing more than a cautionary tale. Fine. But this time I wouldn't be coming alone. This time I'd be bringing their future with me. The iron gates of the Whitmore estate loomed before me like sentinels, guarding a fortress I once called home. 3 years ago, I would have sailed through these gates in Christopher's Bentley, my hand in his, feeling like I belonged in this world of manicured lawns and marble fountains. Tonight, I walked up that endless driveway alone, my modest heels clicking against stones that probably cost more than most people's cars. The paparazzi were already positioned like vultures along the entrance, their cameras flashing as society's elite glided past in their designer gowns and borrowed diamonds. I kept my head high, even as I heard the whispers start. "Is that her? I thought she'd disappeared. How does she have the nerve to show her face here?" Eleanor Whitmore stood at the mansion's entrance like a queen greeting her subjects, draped in pearls and that same cold smile I remembered so well. When she saw me approaching, her eyes lit up with a predatory gleam that made my skin crawl. "Valentina, darling," she called out, her voice loud enough to stop conversations around us. "How absolutely brave of you to grace us with your presence tonight. We're all so curious to see how you've been managing." The word managing dripped with condescension, and I felt every eye in the vicinity turn toward us. Victoria appeared at her mother's side, like she'd been summoned, her red lips curved in that familiar smirk. Mother's been so worried about you, she said with mock concern. Living in that tiny apartment, working those little jobs, it must be such an adjustment from the life you were accustomed to. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast everything in golden light, just like I remembered. But now I saw it differently. The opulence felt cold, performative. These people weren't celebrating charity, they were celebrating themselves. I moved through the crowd like a ghost haunting her former life, feeling their stares, their whispered judgments. Then I saw him. Christopher stood near the bar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. And for a moment, my heart forgot to beat. He looked older, more tired, but those blue eyes were exactly the same. Beside him, a blonde woman with a smile too perfect to be natural hung on his arm like an expensive accessory. Penelope Sterling, according to the society pages. Everything I apparently wasn't. Blonde, blue-blooded, and approved. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor's voice rang out over the crowd, commanding attention with the authority of someone born to rule. Before we begin tonight's auction, I have a very special presentation about the importance of charity, of helping those who've found themselves in unfortunate circumstances. A screen descended from the ceiling, and my stomach dropped. Photos of my belongings, the designer dresses, the jewelry, the life I'd lost, appeared in elegant slideshow format. Victoria stepped forward with a microphone, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. Tonight, we're auctioning items from someone who learned the hard way that some dreams are simply too big for some people. The room erupted in polite laughter. They thought this was entertainment. They had no idea what was coming. The laughter died in my throat as I watched my former life displayed like artifacts in a museum of failure. My wedding dress, the one I'd chosen with such hope, hung there on the auction block like a ghost of broken promises. Victoria's voice droned on about learning one's place in society, while the crowd murmured their approval, their champagne glasses glinting in the chandelier light like tiny weapons. But I wasn't the broken woman they remembered. I wasn't the devastated wife who'd signed those papers with trembling hands 3 years ago. I was someone else entirely now, someone forged in fire, tempered by loss, and carrying the most powerful truth they could never imagine. "Nothing to say for yourself, dear," Eleanor called out, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "No dramatic speeches, no begging for understanding." The crowd turned to me expectantly, waiting for the final act of my humiliation, the moment where I would crumble under their collective judgment. Instead, I walked calmly toward the massive French doors that led to the mansion's entrance. My heels clicked against marble that had once echoed with my laughter, past walls that had witnessed my tears. Every step felt like walking through my own funeral, except I was very much alive. "Where are you going?" Victoria called after me, her voice sharp with irritation. "The evening isn't over yet." I reached the doors and turned back to face them all. Every judgmental face, every cruel smile, every person who'd watched my destruction like it was dinner theater. Christopher stood frozen by the bar, his hand gripping his whiskey glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "You're right, Victoria," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "The evening isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning." I pushed open the doors, and there she was, Sophia, my neighbor who'd become like family over these past 3 years, pushing a double stroller through the entrance. The gasps started immediately, a wave of shock rippling through the crowd as 2 pairs of the most beautiful blue eyes I'd ever seen looked out at the world from beneath thick, dark lashes. Lucas sat on the left, his tiny hand clutching a stuffed elephant, while Isabella babbled softly to herself, her cherubic face breaking into a smile as she saw me. Both of them had Christopher's unmistakable eyes, Eleanor's determined chin, and the distinctive Whitmore dimple that had been passed down through generations of their precious bloodline. The silence that fell over that ballroom was deafening. Champagne glasses remained frozen halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the waitstaff stopped moving, as if time itself had paused to witness this moment. "Everyone," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I'd like you to meet your grandchildren." Christopher's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a crystalline explosion that seemed to echo through eternity. Eleanor's face went white as summer clouds, and Victoria's smug smile finally disappeared. The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Christopher stood frozen among the glittering shards of his whiskey glass, his face cycling through shock, recognition, and something that looked like grief. Because these weren't just any children staring back at him with eyes that mirrored his own. These were 2 years of bedtime stories he'd never read, 2 years of first steps he'd never witnessed, 2 years of a love he'd never known existed. Lucas looked directly at his father with that unflinching curiosity only children possess, then reached out one tiny hand as if he recognized something familiar. The gesture broke Christopher completely. His shoulders began to shake, and for the first time in the 3 years since our divorce, I saw the man I'd once loved beneath all that family programming and cowardice. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and I felt the familiar fire rise in my chest. But this time it wasn't rage, it was righteous clarity. "Tell you?" I repeated, my voice carrying across the stunned ballroom. "Tell the man who chose his family's money over his wife. Tell the people who called me a gold-digging parasite. Tell the family who made sure I left with nothing but the clothes on my back." Eleanor finally found her voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. "This is impossible. The timing. You're lying. These children can't possibly be—" "Look at them, Eleanor," I said quietly, and the entire room seemed to lean forward to hear me. "Really look at them." Isabella chose that perfect moment to babble happily, clapping her hands together with pure joy. She had Eleanor's exact eyes, down to the unusual amber flecks around the iris that made the Whitmore family photographs so distinctive. Lucas turned toward the sound of his sister's laughter, revealing the dimple in his left cheek, the same dimple that graced every Whitmore family portrait hanging in this very hallway. The crowd began to murmur, no longer looking at me with judgment, but at the Whitmore family with something that looked suspiciously like disgust. Phone cameras appeared like magic, capturing every moment of this unraveling. I could already see the headlines: "Billionaire Family's Secret Grandchildren," and "The Twins They Never Knew They Had." Victoria tried desperately to regain control. "Even if these children are related to our family, keeping them secret like this is unconscionable. The legal implications alone." "The legal implications," I interrupted, "of a family that destroyed a woman so completely she was afraid to tell them about their own grandchildren." I bent down and lifted Isabella from her stroller, her warm weight settling perfectly against my hip. "I protected these babies from the same hatred you showed me, from the same racism that made you treat their mother like garbage." Lucas reached up toward me, and I scooped him up too, holding both my children close. "I didn't come here for your money or your apologies," I said, looking directly at Eleanor's stricken face. "I came here so they could see exactly what kind of family they're better off without." The aftermath came swift and merciless, like a storm that had been building for 3 years finally breaking over the Whitmore empire. Within hours, the footage from that ballroom had spread across social media like wildfire. The headlines were brutal: "Billionaire Family's Racist Cruelty Exposed," and "The Grandchildren They Tried to Erase." Eleanor's carefully crafted image as a philanthropist crumbled overnight when reporters dug deeper, uncovering a pattern of discrimination that went far beyond just me. I watched it all unfold from my modest apartment, Lucas playing with blocks on the living room floor, while Isabella napped in my arms. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same family that had once made me feel small and worthless was now desperately calling my phone, begging for meetings, for chances to explain, for opportunities to make things right. Christopher showed up at my door 3 days later, looking like he hadn't slept since that night. His perfect hair was disheveled, his designer suit wrinkled, and those blue eyes, the same ones that looked back at me every day from my children's faces, were red-rimmed with exhaustion and regret. "I need to know them," he said simply, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I need to know my children." "They're not prizes to be won back, Christopher," I replied. But my voice was softer now. The rage that had sustained me for 3 years was slowly giving way to something more complex. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. They're human beings who deserve a father who will protect them from the ugliness your family is capable of. "I know," he whispered, and I could see that he finally, truly did. "I've been in therapy. I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could choose money over love. Who could let fear make me into a coward? I want to be better. I want to be the father they deserve." The real transformation came from Eleanor. The woman who had once sat across from me with such cold certainty about my unworthiness now stood on my doorstep with trembling hands, asking if she could please, just once, hold her grandchildren. The charity boards had dropped her, her society friends whispered behind her back. For the first time in her privileged life, Eleanor Whitmore knew what it felt like to be judged, to be found wanting, to be excluded from a world she desperately wanted to be part of. "I was wrong," she said, the words seeming to physically pain her. "I was cruel and wrong, and I let my prejudices hurt people I should have protected." Looking at her now, this broken woman who had once wielded her power like a weapon against me, I felt something I never expected to feel for Eleanor Whitmore. I felt pity, because karma isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about showing people exactly who they've become and giving them the chance to decide if that's who they want to remain. "Would you like to meet your grandchildren, Eleanor?" I asked quietly. "More than anything in the world." 1 year later, I watch Lucas chase butterflies in the park while Isabella takes her wobbly first steps toward her father. Christopher earned these moments through months of therapy, consistent change, and proving that love means more than blood or money. Eleanor sits beside me on the bench, her once perfect manicured hands now sticky with ice cream from her grandchildren's treats, and for the first time, she looks genuinely happy. They thought my brown skin made me unworthy of their name. But my children carry the best of both worlds, my resilience and their heritage. The Whitmores learned that true family isn't about bloodlines or bank accounts. It's about choosing love over fear, acceptance over prejudice. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that dignity always triumphs over cruelty. Subscribe for more stories where justice prevails, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Sometimes karma isn't revenge. It's simply truth finding its voice.